This is Live Talk with Dwayne Moore. We're talking worship on a global scale.
Hey everybody, Dwayne Moore here. I'm standing in an airport, as you can see. You may hear some announcements happen, actually, that I can't control. But I'm here telling you and welcoming you, first of all, to our live talk show today. We have Tony Guerrero, who will be here interviewing with me. We recorded this interview in advance, knowing that I'd be on this trip. I'm actually on a 4-country tour for the entire month of May, and Africa. We're in Africa now, but then we'll be heading from Africa over to Germany. So it's a lot of traveling, sharing the good news of Jesus with a lot of people, and training worship leaders and pastors wherever we go. So pray for us as we are out doing that this month. And meanwhile, enjoy our show today with Tony Guerrero. He was the music director at Saddleback Church in California for several years, and you're going to learn a lot from this man, a lot of wisdom about ministry, about music, about how to do ministry in music, about life in general. So you'll love it. And pray for us, pray for Next Level Worship and our team as we are out leading conferences in various parts of the world. Thanks so much.
Live Talk with Dwayne Moore. Biblical worship perspective.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Live Talk. We have a good friend of mine. We've never really hung out, Tony, but I consider you a good friend, Tony Guerrero, and you are out in California. Welcome.
Right. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Always nice to be remembered.
It is, man. I think about you often, and every time we have you, when one of our coaching classes or on something like this, you make an impression, buddy. You do.
That's nice. Nice to hear.
I want to make sure, though, I always want to stop and make sure I'm saying your last name right, because I'm from Alabama, and I struggle with about half of what I say anyway, from being a southern Alabama boy. But it looks like Guerrero, but it's pronounced right. Guerrero. Is that right?
It's Guerrero.
It really is Ro.
Yeah.
I'm glad.
And the truth is, here, I'll make you feel a little better. I am, my father's from Mexico. My mom is from LA, but I have a lot of Mexican heritage and literally hundreds of Mexican relatives.
Okay.
I am the only one in the hundreds of relatives, including my sisters and even my mom, who's not Mexican at all. I'm the only one who doesn't speak Spanish.
Really? Interesting.
And I mean, I understand a good amount of it, but I really can't speak it. And I can't say my own name properly because I don't roll my R's properly because it's supposed to be.
That's right. Do they?
I can't really do it very well.
Yeah. Depending on where we are in Africa, they sometimes roll their R or they'll flip it. And so, even that for them, it's different. We have our director, one of our directors in Zambia. Her name is Orabina. And so you roll that R, but then we have somebody in Ethiopia that we need to try to flip the R. And so it just gets so confusing.
Yeah. Right.
Well, I'm glad to hear that I'm not the only one that struggles with names. So, okay. Well, Tony, you've got a rich history that we're going to get into and some experience you've got in the area of music and leadership. But let's start with, who are you, man? Tell us about your family. Tell us where you live in. Just tell us some things.
Well, I live in Southern California. I've been here my whole life, and I'm about an hour south of Los Angeles. Okay. And I've most of my life have made my living as a freelance musician. And being close to LA means that there's a lot of really good high caliber work. Yeah. But also a lot of really good high caliber competition for that work. And so I'm very privileged. I get to work with some great musicians and be involved in some great projects. And then also be around people that I just, as musicians, I marvel at, and I look at them and I think I could never even touch their skill level. And so it's a rich place to be as a musician, and I'm very fortunate that I was born here, and like I said, I'm about an hour south of LA, but I I'm in LA constantly. And many times I really should have moved to LA, but I live in Orange County, and it's just home, and it's nice and pretty here. And
I've heard Orange County is beautiful.
yeah, not quite as crowded. And,
Yeah.
I'm very blessed to live where I live, and I never forget that. And, it's a great place for my kids. I have two kids, a daughter who's 16 and a son who's 14, and my daughter, especially right now, is really into guitar and, talking with her friends about starting a band. And, it's fun to watch her go through that little process that I went through as a kid. Starting a band for them has more to do with coming up with a cool name and drawing logos, but that's exactly what I did too. So
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Is Riverside, the city of Riverside, is that in Orange County? If it is, then I've been in Orange County.
No, Riverside. So LA and Riverside and Orange County is like a big triangle, basically.
Oh, okay.
So you have LA here, Riverside here, Orange County down here.
Down here. Okay, that's what. Yeah. So because California Baptist University had me come out and speak about 3 years ago, and I remember it was really pretty. But I was thinking we never actually made it to Orange County, but I wanted to make sure.
I'm actually teaching at Cal Baptist.
Are you?
I finished a year there teaching music production.
Oh.
And yeah, it's about 40-45 minutes from me to get there.
So Rick Muchow, I know that he's no longer with us. He's moved on to a much better place in heaven. But Rick lived in Orange County, did he not?
He lived really close to me. I moved here. Well, I was always kind of in the area. I wasn't far, but I specifically moved to this house when not long after I was working at Saddleback Church.
Saddleback. Okay.
This house is really close to Saddleback Church, and Rick Muchow lived real close to here as well. And
well, I remember that I wanted to go out and see him, and it was a little too far. I couldn't find a way to get out there with our transportation situation while we were there. But Rick is a dear friend over the years. He was at Saddleback as the worship leader, pastor. I'm not sure what his title was, but I know that he was there. And you served with him, alongside him somehow for several years, did you not? Weren't you a part of it?
I was on staff. Yeah, I was on staff for 11 years. And my role certainly changed over the years. I started off part-time just as a music director, and little by little started taking on more responsibilities and went full-time for quite a while, and ended up as director of creative arts, which was kind of allowing Rick and some of the other senior leaders in the church to kind of step into more senior positions. So he would still be very active as the worship leader and on Sundays and all of that, but being able to manage the team, which at that point, when I started, that was 18 employees and 1,000 volunteers when you go into the choir and the orchestra and actors and all that stuff. So I really got to get my hands dirty, like managing a big organization like that, and have had some good creative freedom where I could make projects happen and, that kind of thing. And he gave me a lot of latitude to do those kinds of things,
Yeah. I remember that, I'm kind of going back in nostalgia here a little bit, but I think it's a good memory. Rick reached out to me to invite me to Rancho Capistrano or something. I think it's called. Anyway, it used to be owned by Crystal Cathedral or somebody like that. And this is a beautiful ranch. And I never actually went to the campus of Saddleback, but he picked me up and took me over to this ranch, whatever. And we had several worship leaders and people there, authors, and I think I was the only author, but a lot of recording artists kind of people. I didn't know any of them, and they didn't know me, but I was honored to be there. But I remember it was like just sitting around talking. We had Chuck Fromm came over from Worship Leader Magazine and addressed the crowd. Rick came in and spoke to us. So it was really a really good time. But anyway, I remember when he picked me up from the airport, he was on the phone with somebody talking. This is Rick Muchow. And I heard him talk about iPads. He said, "Oh yeah, I think we should buy iPads for everyone." And this is back when not everybody had iPads. And I thought, okay. So I always even then thought, okay, these people are right on the edge. They stay in the current, And but Saddleback's one of those churches in our country and really around the world. It's a leader, not only in size, but just creativity and leader of thought in ministry. Yeah. And so you were right in the middle of all that for a long time.
definitely during the 2000s when Rick Warren
Yeah.
in the 90s had come out with a book called The Purpose Driven Church, and then in the early 2000s Purpose Driven Life, and it really did start a pretty big movement. And there are, as all movements kind of ebb and flow, and there's a lot of other churches now that are leading the way in different areas. And I'm actually at another church now. I'm not at Saddleback, but I'm still close to a lot of people there, and I still know a lot of what's going on. And Rick Warren and I exchanged messages just the other night, in fact. So I'm very aware of what's happening there. And there's still, an incredibly dynamic church. Rick Warren is stepping down as the senior
I heard a
pastor.
rumor about that. I wasn't going to say because I didn't know, but I'd heard.
Yeah. One of the things that, any large church is going to have its share of critics, and any pastor his size is going to have their share of critics. But I'll tell you, man, I no matter what the criticism, I will stand up and defend the fact that this man made a promise to God when he started this church: give me this church and I'll give you 40 years there. And that's exactly what he did. And he built Saddleback from literally nothing, 5 people in a living room, to what it is. And he's stepping down after 2020 would have been the official 40 years, but with COVID and all that, they didn't make that transition. But I believe Easter was his last. I don't know this for sure, but I believe that was his last official message as senior pastor.
Wow.
But now I just told you I know what's going on there, and I don't really, because I don't know. I don't know the process. I don't know.
No,
I don't
you're
think
not
they have
there.
somebody in place yet. I don't know how they're making that transition, but it's happening. Yeah.
So you said you're at another church now. Is it obviously it's in the same area? You wouldn't travel?
Yeah.
that? So
A little further from my house. It's about 20 minutes in the morning.
Okay.
Which, So I'll tell you, when you and I have talked a lot about my book that I wrote and some of my philosophy.
Yeah, I want to get into some of that too today. Yeah.
And this church, in a way, is a product of some of that, and I'll explain that. The church has been around for over 30 years, but one of the chapters in my book, I talk about the issue of you inviting non-believers to participate.
Yes, I love that.
In church music, and I don't do that flippantly, and I don't think that you can do that without a lot of really carefully considered planning and thought into how it's done. But I'm a fan of it for several reasons. One, because I became a believer because somebody brought me in to play at church when I wasn't a believer.
Oh, okay.
And that's a big part of my testimony.
Wow.
And then, and over the years, I have seen people that I've brought into church become not just strong believers, but leaders. One guy, boy, I tell you, I could tell stories about these guys a lot. A couple of them went on to become huge producers. Now they're out in Nashville producing major Christian artists.
Wow.
One of them when I met him, he was playing in country bars and, pretty far from a Christian. He was originally from Italy. He just, was it 2 years ago or a year ago? He and his wife moved back to Italy to start a church, and he's pastoring a church now in Italy. He is one of the most on fire believers I've ever known. And anyway, so the church I'm at now, there's a guitar player I've known since he was in high school. I'm 5 years older than him. And we met in the jazz world, and he was a young kid trying to learn what was happening in the jazz world, and I was just still getting my feet wet. And but we've been really great friends since, at this point, it's been since like 1988 is when we met. So a lot of years. And he's a brilliant guitar player, toured with guys like Joe Walsh and the guys from the Foo Fighters, and the famous drummer who just passed away, Taylor Hawkins. He was in Taylor's band. I mean, he's a really serious musician. And I used him at church for a lot of years. And, he was always sort of that borderline kind of guy, And sort of out of the blue, about 4 years ago, he called me and said, I think I'm going to go talk to this church. And basically, long story short, he ended up becoming the worship leader and then worship director of the whole program at this church nearby. And he's like, a complete turnaround in his life in terms of that's what he does now for a living. He used to be this great session guitar player and live guitar player. And now all he wants to do is be in the church and lead worship. So when COVID hit and we were all kind of quarantined, he asked me to come play piano for their online services that they were doing on the weekends. And I said yes. And then honestly, I've just been there mostly because I just wanted to be serving under my friend who served under me for so many years.
Yeah.
And so it's just been fun to be under his leadership, knowing what a knucklehead he was
Yeah.
And I've told him flat out, like, I've known you 35 years. I never would have given you this job. Like it never crossed my mind to picture you in this role. But that pastor saw that in him and brought it out. And that's what it takes. It just, for me, it took getting him into church, keeping him in church, and letting God do the work, not just through me, but through other people like this pastor. So,
wow. Well, we'll go ahead and put the picture of your book up. Our producer will do that, and so because I want everyone to see, this book's been out for a little while, but it's very, very relevant and needed. Some of the things you teach in attracting musicians and how you talk about that in your book. And so it's still available, right? Still available on Amazon and I guess and other places.
I think so. I'll be honest with you. I don't remember how it's available. I know you can order it on my website.
That's what I was going to ask. What about your website?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll put that up. Yeah. People can see.
Yeah. I can't remember now at this. I think the digital versions are still available on Amazon.
Yeah, I understand. I'm the same way on some things I've got.
That book it's 17 years old this year. Wow. Yeah, I didn't realize that.
Wow. But some of the things that
there are some chapters I would add.
Yeah, I bet. Oh, don't you know? That's the same with me. I've definitely learned along the way. Well, let's go back to that idea of using musicians outside the church. I remember one of the major conversations at Rancho Capistrano. Am I saying that right? I'm not sure.
Yeah, Rancho Capistrano. Yeah, that's right.
Okay. There with Saddleback's Rick Muchow and a couple of others from Saddleback were there. Mentioned Rick Warren came over. But one of the major conversations that happened during that week, it was kind of like just like a think tank kind of a group of just how do we disciple our teams. That was the conversation that Rick Muchow wanted to put together. And I was honored to be a part of it. But I remember it came up more than once. Well, what about unchurched people being, even people that don't profess Christ as Savior, in your band, in your team? And I remember Rick Muchow was kind of against the grain on that one. Most of them going around the room saying, we don't do that. We wouldn't do that. And he was like, yeah, we do that. And so I'm intrigued by that philosophy. I'm in agreement with it. And I want to hear more about how you recommend to people that are leaders, how you go out and recruit in that way. And first of all, why would you do it? I think you've already touched on it. Just unpack that for us a little bit. That's really interesting.
There's a lot of little like rabbit trail thoughts I have on the subject. Okay. I like to use the example to start with I remember Darlene Scheck came out with a live album that was her with the I want to say the Sydney Philharmonic or major orchestra in Australia, and it was doing all of her worship tunes. And you hear on this album an entire audience of people worshiping, and I believe very genuinely worshiping. And it dawns on me, it's very obvious to me. I'm pretty sure not everybody in that orchestra is a believer.
Probably not.
And I mean, it's a pretty good chance that a major symphony orchestra that's the case, that you probably have people of all faiths and they're just there playing the notes.
Yes.
Ultimately, what they are doing is facilitating the person who's leading. Yes. That's the worship leader. Similarly, having a non-believer in the congregation singing along to worship songs does not affect the worship of the person standing next to them necessarily. I mean, God, if we believe God can see through all that stuff, he knows right where everybody is at. He knows. And in fact, I used to be better at quoting the exact scripture, but is it in Amos where he talks about he despises
Amos 5. Yep.
Yeah, he despises basically the worship of the believer that's
They
not.
call it noise. Yep.
Yeah. And so to me, that's more damning than
Yep.
than the non-believer who doesn't realize there's a that these words have meaning or whatever. That the believer who knows what those words mean and isn't living it and isn't, that's something that God despises. So it's kind of easy to turn that around a little bit. And in some ways, it's almost a little safer to have the non-believer there because we don't know where all these believers are.
Yep.
And it's not up to us to decide that. It's all up to God. And that's where ultimately that the music of a non-believing bass player does not affect God's heart in that way. And in fact, I think it pleases him to think believers might get around this person and love that person.
That was Rick Muchow's thing. He said,
yeah, and that's
he gave the illustration of singing in a choir and these people gathering around him and they seeing their lifestyle and getting saved. I mean, following Christ as a result of being around Christians. That was his thing.
And I literally know dozens, I don't want to exaggerate and say hundreds, but I have seen that time and time again with my own experience as a leader in ministry, watching how Rick led and, just seeing other examples of that. It's exactly right. And I think a lot of times the issue that somebody might have with it is twofold. One, they can't be worshiping if they don't believe the words that, so I will say this, I don't necessarily allow the same thing with the singers because you are singing words.
Yep.
And to stand in front of a congregation and lead with words you don't believe, I don't think I'm somebody I'm not strong enough to jump on that, but I do have an argument to it that I'll give you in a minute. But a lot of times the argument has to do with, well, when the church sees those people up there, they're leaders. They are representing the church. So if they go out in the world and now they see them at a bar and they're drunk and wasted or whatever it is, well, first of all, you have the same fear with Christians, with believers.
Yes.
In fact, you're probably there's probably an argument to be made that the at least the non-believers being a little more authentic. But it really becomes an issue of proximity because if that same person were in the congregation singing along, people don't have the same issue, right? So it's about putting them as a leader. So that's why earlier I said you have to be very intentional. I couldn't ever do this at Saddleback, but I love the idea of being at a smaller church and saying to the congregation, hey, next weekend, our drummer's out of town. We've invited a drummer from the community. He's not a believer. He's going to come and play. Just so you know, he's not a believer. He's going to be here. Let's love him. Let's show him, And I love that, to get the whole church on board and for them to know and welcome this guest in. And, again, you can't do that at a place as big as Saddleback, but that kind of intentionality is very different. And at the very least, to involve your team in the process so your team knows who this person is and where they're coming from.
Yeah.
And, I think that's all very important. And so it becomes kind of an issue of geography. If they're standing here singing, it doesn't matter. But if they're standing there playing bass, all of a sudden it matters. Yeah. And there's kind of an issue with that. And I'll backtrack to the singer thing. So I've never put a singer up there who's not a believer that I know of. And but I will give an example that my friend Darko, who was from Australia, and he was planning a church in Ukraine, and this is mid-late 90s. He got to Ukraine, knew nobody, and very much not much of a Christian population there at the time. He went around town to the bars and asked all the musicians he saw playing, who's the best keyboard player and who's the best singer in town. And turned out it was a husband and wife team. So that made it a little easier, but he was able to track them down in the clubs, wherever they were playing, and said, I've got a job for you. I need you to learn these songs, show up on Sunday morning, bring a band with you. I'll pay you. You come and sing these songs. Not only did they come sing those songs, the first season of that, and I'll forget the details, it's been so long, but I know for the first season, they would do the church music, go downstairs to the bar, come back and finish the service drunk. I shouldn't say drunk, at least having had a drunk.
I understand.
And, but again, to jump ahead now many years, they ended up becoming the senior pastors of that church. They ended up, at the time, they were leading, they became the senior pastors of Hillsong Ukraine, or Hillsong Kiev, I think. I can't remember. They left that. They're now in Florida with a new church that they've planted a couple years ago. Like, again, two of the most on fire believers I've ever known. They were brought in to sing songs. I mean, she's an amazing singer. They were brought in to sing songs she did not believe at all. And it's God still work through those lyrics, through those scriptures, whatever it is, God can still work. So it's a challenge for me to think about the vocalist, but as a musician, I can bring a guitar player in or a drummer, and I love the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, when we teach which we teach in many places, I'm leaving actually Tuesday for a month. I'm doing a 4-country training tour. I'm excited about in East Africa and then Germany. But when we go into these places, we teach that the people that are involved with the singing or playing or even running the sound, you're a part of the leadership. And so it might sound like I'm actually coming against what I teach, but I'm not, I don't think, doing that. When I say, yes, they are part of the leadership, and I don't feel comfortable generally putting a mic in their hand, like you said. I'm kind of with you on that when it comes to singing and being the person. But if I know I can help influence that person to come to Christ, I'm going to find a way, because I've seen it too. I've actually seen this happen with groups I've been a part of and leading over the years. I've seen them come into the fold because of their involvement with us. So I get the argument on both sides and I respect it. Like I said, I teach that they're all leaders, so be careful how you live. I get it. But come on. I mean, when you got an opportunity to be an evangelist in the midst of that with your music ministry, let's find a way.
And that's part of what Rick Muchow was
compromising. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, when Rick Muchow was talking about the choir, I think he used the choir that way.
Yeah, I don't think he. I feel like he didn't. I'm sorry if I'm wrong on this, but I don't think he said use the main leaders, but
right.
More in the background on the choir. I think's how you. If I'm not mistaken, it's been a while, but that's what I remember.
Yeah. So many times people who are coming to church are coming there because they're lost, because they don't believe, and they're searching, and getting into a choir or something like that before they've even taken those final steps. It's a beautiful way to have that happen in your life. Yeah. I love that.
You unpack that more in your book, right?
I do,
yeah. And even what you shared about, because I remember we had you in our coaching network. We try to have you every year because everybody loves you. And I remember you've come in, you've talked about, you've challenged our worship leaders and our coaching to go out there, and if your pastor is okay with it, go out there and find some of those musicians. And that's so different. I mean, I wish somebody told me that, 10, 15 years ago. I love that idea.
Yeah. I mean, I do believe that's that's part of our mission field. We always think of our mission field as being somewhere on the other side of the world, but we have a mission field within a few blocks of our church and our home. It's not unusual to think about, our neighbors are part of our mission field, but also the community you're in. And as a musician, that means the musical community of your town. That's part of your mission field also. And you need to make yourself known to that community and get to know them, become a part of their lives, have them become a part of your life. I think that's part of our role.
Oh, I agree with you completely.
Especially if you're complaining about why your church doesn't have enough musicians,
Yeah, that's right. When they're around, we need to be proactive, thinking outside of what we typically thought of, just right there in front of us. So that brings me to another conversation, a thought that I'd like to ask you about. You are the leader of this wonderful jazz band, and you guys play, and you're a very, very effective musician. You're an excellent musician. Okay. How do you recommend that a leader up the quality of their musicianship or is that vital? What do you think within a church? Let's start there. Do you think it matters that much? Let's start with that.
I think it matters. I think everywhere in Scripture that we there's any edict given about whether or not there should be quality, it's always yes, there should be quality.
Right.
Even when he talks about building the tabernacle, it's like get the finest tent makers. Not just get the lowest bidder, like get the best bid you can get. Get the best. Kenaniah was appointed because of his skill leading musicians. Yep. That's why he was appointed to lead them. Yep. It's that. I mean, there are probably other reasons, and I would imagine his level of faith and devotion must have had to be at a certain level too. But what it says in Scripture, it says it's his skill that put him in that position. Mm-hmm. And I love. There's another passage that talks about how the musicians, it was full of young and old alike, which to me implies mentorship. That the older doesn't mean that's the better musician, but that the better musicians were coaching the less good musicians, and that's a big part of it. And I think it's lazy to not pursue quality in church music, and I think we're called to it, and I think it's lazy to not do it. I think we lose the battle with the world when we do that. I mean, worship music these days, anyways, is a 5 to 10 year late copy of what pop music is doing as it is.
It feels that way a lot of times.
Be that way. The church used to be the chief benefactor benefactor of the arts, and it's not that way. And I'll tell you, one of the things I mentioned earlier, I made a little joke about how there are chapters I would add to that book now, and I would have a long talk about the issue of tracks being used in church, which may sound like I'm anti-track. I'm not anti-track, but I'm anti the way we're using tracks, or the way a lot of churches use them. And I have now met young musicians who have never been on stage playing music without having tracks.
Oh yeah.
Ears. Yep. And somebody in their ear saying, now we're at the chorus.
Now we're at play the chorus. Now the verse.
Yeah. Yep. Mm-hmm. And I don't know a less strong word. I hate it. I hate it. Yep. Nothing drives me crazy more than that. And in my non-church world, I use tracks sometimes when it's appropriate, and I have no problem with tracks being used for the right reasons. But when you're a church with a full band and you're still using tracks because you need all 7 keyboard parts that were on the album, no, you don't. And to me, it's the same as this. Imagine you were hearing this pastor speak, and his message was just so great and powerful, and every word was just spot on. And then you got the close up and you saw he had a little thing in his ear, and he's basically just repeating a Billy Graham message word for word, and there's somebody in his ear going, all right, now lift your right hand. And, to me, it's not any different than that. And I have an issue with that. And that to me is affecting the quality, because it means the bands don't have to be as prepared. They don't have to be as cognizant of what's going on around them, because there's somebody in their ear saying, here's what's next. And if they're not quite in tune, the sound guy can turn the pre-recorded vocals up. And if that keyboard player can't play the part well, here's the track. And I played at one church as a guest once, and then I went and watched the online service. And online, it was the pre-recorded track. So I had no reason to be there. And I just kind of determined I was not a fan of that. So,
well, I remember that in fact, I've quoted you about this, and when you talk about, it's in your book, but you talk about what attracts a quality musician, and one of those things is creativity. And one of the things I struggle with these pre-recorded canned things is someone else created that. But then what are we going to do? We just come along and mimic what they did. Well, that takes out that. I know it's challenging. You got to practice in advance. You can't just show up that morning and play. Okay, right. It takes some work, but there's a lot of fun and enjoyment in creating things, and that's I feel like that's taken out of it.
Well, again, you really shouldn't be involved in music ministry regularly if you are not willing to put the work in, because it requires practice and rehearsal, and those are two different things. The practice is what you do on your own. Rehearsal is where everybody who's practiced gets together and puts the pieces of the puzzle together, and all of that is necessary. Yep. And I just it kind of drives some people crazy, but I don't like to listen to the original versions of songs.
I don't either. I'm the same way.
Because I don't see any exactly what you're saying too. I know from being in the recording studio thousands of times, most of what ends up on albums is what somebody thought of in the studio and just thought, oh, check out this sound. Oh, how about this line here? How about we do let's add a cymbal swell here. And then by the time it gets out on a record and that's what everybody's hearing, there's this whole school of thought, well, we have to do exactly what they did on the record. Well, they didn't do that the day before they recorded it. It was something different. So I'm just much more a believer in you find the songs that are good songs, which they're not all good songs, but you find the good songs and you make music out of them that is unique to your church body and to this group of musicians.
You guys listening to that, you hear what he said, that it's unique to your church body. Well, that's huge.
Yeah.
And to your musicians. And to your musicians.
And every musician has their own strengths and influences that they can bring out. And the good leaders know how to use all of those strengths and abilities. Duke Ellington led one of the greatest big bands in all of jazz history. When you look at his scores, it doesn't say first trumpet, second trumpet, third trumpet. It has the names of the musicians who were in the band at the time.
Okay.
And over the years, he would change those parts if a new musician came in who could add something different or couldn't do what that one could do.
Interesting.
And so they were always ebbing and flowing based on who was in the band. And that, to me, that Duke Ellington band of any era is representative of that band at that era, not of the band from the 1930s. The 1960s band wasn't the 1930s band.
That's so interesting.
Even though it was sometimes the same songs and the same leader. It changed. And so for me, there's no reason why I need to sound like a Chris Tomlin record when I have whatever my level of abilities are. My church is different. We can make this sound ourselves. And who are we worried about pleasing? If we want it to be good, that's up to us to make the quality good. That's where all the preparation and lessons and all of that and the leadership comes in. We want it to be good. And so a lot of people just say, well, I know if I use tracks, it'll sound good. And that's where it stops.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
So,
well, that's a soapbox worth being on.
Yes.
Well, I really do, because I feel like it's not, I think we've just kind of accepted it in a lot of places. So it's just like, that's what we do now. And so I feel like I think it's good to use some tracks. I think it's good to use some of that. I can see some need for it, but just to rely on it completely. Let's go here a little bit deeper. Do you recommend playing with a click track with a band?
I do. If the, obviously time is a difficult thing for even great musicians. I think I've only met one drummer who has perfect time.
Yeah.
Maybe a couple more who are just really right on. And I don't mind when music ebbs a little bit in the time. In fact, some great records from over the years have that. But I don't mind the click track if it keeps everybody locked in a little bit more. Personally, I like the drummer to be on it. I got spoiled. My drummer at my last season at Saddleback is a close friend of mine, and he always liked to have a click track, but none of us heard it.
Okay. So I've done that before. Yeah.
Yeah. He was always solid. And then we played to him.
Just played to him.
And so I love that. So I'm not anti click track, nor am I anti no click track. It just really kind of depends on the musicians and the ability there. And, teaching young drummers to play with a click track is a good thing. So if you've got a less experienced drummer, that's going to be a big help. And they should be practicing with a click track. I mean, they teach drummers to do that anyways, to practice with a metronome. And so really you should be doing that. So no problem there. And, with tracks, definitely it's okay if there's a tune that's let's say a special tune or one particular tune that has this beautiful orchestration or something that you just can't create and you want to do that as a special thing. Right. No problem there. But just to do it on every single song and to take all the freedom away for the spirit to move in any way, and for the worship leader to have no freedom to say, let's repeat that verse. I just think I don't know, you're losing so much. I think the church lost so much with that.
Now I realize that we're speaking to some people, or some people are listening rather, that probably aren't musicians and they don't know what we're talking about, because when you're sitting in the congregation and you're
Right.
watching and you're listening, you don't hear the click in the ear. So what we mean is is musicians, if you notice, a lot of times, I'm talking to whoever's watching or listening right now, they'll have something in their ear, and that is an earbud, but what's going on inside that is there's a click happening, and maybe someone's talking to them pre-recorded, telling them, okay, we're going to sing the chorus again. Okay, now it's time for the first verse. And so that's what we mean by this. And this has come along, Tony, what do you think, in the last 10 years, pretty strong, maybe?
I would say in the last 10 years, yeah.
Yeah. And with technology as it is, and I think a lot of us embraced it because we were excited about something new, and we certainly did need to tighten up our bands. But I feel like this pendulum has swung almost too far. Sometimes we've depended on it now to the point where we're not depending on that creativity of our band, like we said, and the people the Lord has sent us. Well, what if you do? What if that guitar player just can't hit the licks? That everybody enjoys on the recording. What do you do? Do you challenge that guy or that gal to step up, or do you just let it go, or what do you do?
One, yes, you challenge.
Okay.
I mean, there is I do ask people all the time, are you better at your instrument now than when you started at the church? You know, are you better right now than you were a year ago? Because we should all be improving. There's always room to improve. There's not a person on earth who has ever mastered an instrument.
Wow, that's a statement.
Yeah, it's true. Even Art Tatum or Rubinstein or any of the great the Goldberg variations. I'm blanking on his first name, but like the most Yo-Yo Ma on the cello, like unbelievable musicians. But he hasn't mastered every style of playing the cello and every technique there is, and it's just there's not a single person that in history that ever has. Wow. And so that means there's always room to improve. And the greatest musicians will tell you that I've got more to learn. And so yes, you challenge them. And two, I don't think any song needs any special lick or opening riff or any specific beat or whatever. There's very few songs that need that. There was a quote, and I'm not going to get it right, but from Luther Vandross, the great singer, and he said something to the effect of, it's a great song if it can be done with just the piano and the vocalist. Yeah,
I've heard that. I didn't know he said that, but yes.
Yeah, and that's really true. So all the other stuff is bells and whistles. You have the little synth sound you like, or the little guitar lick, and all of that's great. And I'm a producer. I use all that stuff when I produce, and I love it. But very few things are necessary for a song to be. The only thing necessary in a song, especially a worship song, is the lyric first and the melody second. Everything else is up for grabs.
Oh, I agree with that. Yeah, that's good. I had when I was in Birmingham, Alabama, as a worship leader there, I had helped start a church there, and we had a band, that was it was a small church, but it was a good band. I got to say, those guys were quality. Well, we had one guy that was interested in joining our band, but he was in another church, or he was wanting, he was looking around, and he was considering this other church as much larger, well-known church. They had multiple services, multiple campuses, and so he went over there and tried that out, and he's one of the best guitarists in Birmingham at the time, in my opinion. He was incredible. He had a degree in classical guitar and just a really, really quality musician. Well, anyway, and he practiced at home a lot. He was that kind of guy. So anyway, he called me one day. He said, "Dwayne, I love the church, great people, but I'm just not fitting into the band." He said, "It's not working for me." I said, "Well, come on, at this other church." I said, "Okay, well, why?" He said, "Well, they won't let me do anything creatively." He said, "I've got to play just what the other guy plays, and just the same licks, the same everything, because it's all got to sound the same from campus to campus and song to song and service to service." And I went, "Okay, I probably couldn't fit into that very well either." So what's your take on that? That's a really interesting, and maybe that's the way it is nowadays. I don't know. What's your take on that?
It's it goes against every fiber in my being. I would be a horrible musician in a pit orchestra for a Broadway show, because I wouldn't have it in me to play the same show every night the exact same way. There's a place for that, and I get it. And sometimes as a composer or as a band leader, I want this from you at certain times, So I get it, but as a player, and when we go back to that having some creative ownership, I wouldn't last in that kind of setting. And in fact, I say no when I'm asked to play in those kinds of settings.
And he did. He ultimately said no. He said it was nothing personal against the people, great people. He said, I just can't. I don't enjoy that.
Yeah,
And I played with him for a long time, and he didn't go crazy. He wasn't. He didn't mess anyone up. He was very, very good and restrained, but still creative.
I played at one kind of well-known church where I was just a guest musician a few times, and exactly that happened. Where there was a line on the piano. I can't remember the song, but let's say that was the line. That's the written line from the album, and I did something like,
Oh yeah,
just something,
something
and I got a stern talking to right after that.
No, really interesting.
And that's just because they're just people who don't know,
Locked in.
They don't know music that way. They know it as this regimented, it's got to sound like this. And I would love to break the church of that more than any other industries, to break the church of that type of regimented musical attitude that really has pervaded the last 10 years or so. And Trax has allowed that to happen.
It has.
Because it's a great tool. Trax are a great tool that are being abused. That's how I look at it.
Well, it brings to mind when I was leading. It was a large church for me. It's 10 times larger than anything I'd ever led before. But in that setting in Louisville, Kentucky, it was about 6 years ago. So tracks and practice tracks had come in of their own. And what we mean by that, those of you watching and listening, is these are actually tracks you listen to at home, and they're the same thing you're about to go and do. They just break it into individual guitars and pianos and different things. You listen to your part and you play it. And I realized that when I got in there, and if I was the piano player that day and I didn't play it just like it was written, I noticed that it would frustrate a couple of band members because they've been practicing all week with their part, waiting for my little note to hit so they can hit their note. And so if I didn't hit my note right, it messed them up. And so, okay. And so I would try to restrain myself and play what was written. But so I can understand some things, like you said, if they're maybe not to a point of being a musician to just count it well, maybe they need the help. So I think we have to play with that some, but wow, it's very different than it was a few years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm very often frustrated and I find myself now having to fight having an attitude in my head during a church worship service. Because it's hard to turn that kind of thing off.
Yeah.
When you're in that environment, you're seeing these things, in the same way that a musician, no matter how strong your desire to worship God, your ear's going to catch that horribly attitude singer.
Yeah.
You can't help,
Can't help that. I have a 26-year-old who's a wonderful musician. He traveled with a group named Carrollton for a while and was a lead singer, and he wrote a lot of songs, and he's very creative. He does, with his music, he does not like tracks. He does not like it. He doesn't. He said, look, let's take the band we got. Let's make it the best it can be. And I'm like, okay, I'm old. I'm supposed to think that way, but you're young and you still think that. So interesting.
I occasionally come up with some, I find some young musicians who are very much, in fact, the singer Crystal Lewis.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I work with her a lot, but her daughter, who's in her mid-20s, is a brilliant songwriter, singer, guitar player. And when I've had her on sessions, she will refuse to do the session if you're going to tune her vocal later.
Interesting.
Yeah, like she does not.
That sounds kind of like Stephen. That's kind of his attitude. But no.
Yeah. So there are those who have that purist. It's not completely lost. So
yeah. Well, tell us. You don't just have that one book. I saw on your website you got some other things. So where do we go to find your resources? Where do we go to tap into this knowledge and wisdom and all we've been hearing about today?
The book does cover just a certain scope of the ministry I've done over the years. But there is a collection of articles there, and they're all kind of dated now because I started writing for Worship Leader magazine in the mid 2000s, I think, and wrote for them for about 7 years, I think. But a lot of those, almost all of those articles are also on my webpage. So if you go to my TonyGuerrero.com, and I think it's under, I don't know, somewhere you'll see a link to my writing.
Oh, okay.
And there's a list of those articles. And I just cover a lot of like specific little topics that are interesting to me and were a part of my process and my journey as a worship musician and leader, and just understanding my role in all of that.
Well, it's been very interesting, and I wanted to bring this to our listeners, and I hope to involve you in something that we do in our community, other than just in this setting. So I'm looking for ways to to do that. I know you're busy; you don't need one more thing on your plate, but I think all this information in your head and heart and this wisdom needs to be shared. So
thank you, I appreciate that. I'd be happy to do anything that comes across my plate. So
yeah, well, we appreciate that, and so. You are a dear brother and a friend, and also someone that we can learn from. As younger worship leaders out there, I hope they will take advantage of what you offer. And so, in closing, Tony, why don't you wrap up for us, for those who are watching that don't know why we're doing all this? They're not even maybe a believer in Jesus Christ. Why go to all this trouble to worship this God, and go to all this trouble to practice and all the stuff we've been talking about? What kind of makes you tick inside, man? Let's hear that testimonial to kind of wrap it up today.
Well, I'll tell you what, I've been very aware of my life. I'm in my mid 50s now. Some changes have been going on in my life and my family, and I've been reflecting a lot on. There was a great Frank Sinatra song called "Cycles," where he talks about just life goes in these cycles, and or seasons. Oh, I like this. A young girl at our church during our prayer time, she said, "God, you're a God of seasons." And I like that a lot, because that we go through these seasons in our lives. And I've been reflecting a lot lately on those seasons when I was down, when things seemed like everything was going wrong. How those are the seasons that have built everything that's good about me now, have come from those seasons. Wow. And all of that is because of the God I serve, and because of the God that I had to lean on in those times, even when I didn't know what that meant, and that I had to very imperfectly lean on him and beg him to save me, and beg him to, fix this situation, whatever it is. And then then things start to get better. And then I kind of drop off a little bit on the begging God to help me every day. And then the next season comes, and the next season. And yet it's kind of like the stock market, you kind of see it go like this. It's always going up and down. Yeah. But as my faith has increased, so has the level of all the goodness in my life. Like I have no doubts that Jesus loves me, that he died for me, that I don't deserve any of it.
Amen. And
that he has blessed me beyond any reason or rational thought as to why I should be blessed. And just reflecting on my life lately and those seasons, I'm so grateful for all those dark times. James 1 always tells us to be, thankful for the trials we go through. And it's hard to be in the middle of a trial and be thankful for it. But I've learned that now, because I can reflect back on these dark, hard times in my life and what has come out of them. And I am grateful now for those, not only those times, but dark times, even the dark times to come. I know I've got more in store. And I don't know. I wasn't ready for the proper answer for that question, but that's the first thing that triggers how much I've just been thinking about those different seasons in my life, and how much I've depended on God and how much he has built me more each time I've had to fall back into his lap.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so does that, just to try to connect the dots here with someone watching and listening,
Yeah.
does that motivate you to want to be this person that offers him every? I mean, to me, it's a leading question that I know the answer to, but I want others to understand that. I mean, what causes you to get up in the mornings and do what you do, and do this church thing? I mean, you get paid maybe for it a little bit, but you don't get rich at it. Come on, man. Why do you do this? And, how's the connection between what we see on a platform and what you're doing in your life? That's what I'm asking.
I'm afraid part of that answer has to sound a little selfish, because God has given me this incredible gift of music. Yep. Whatever level I'm at, the fact that I can make music at all is such a gift.
Yep.
And when people talk about the sacrifice of music ministry, I have a hard time with that phrase, because it doesn't feel like a sacrifice.
Doesn't feel like one, yeah.
I love making music. I love getting to make music with people. Like, if I'm in church and I'm not part of the music team, I'm thinking I want to be up there right now, Yeah. And so part of that, honestly, is selfish. God has given me this great gift that I get to do. And I get to worship. Like, that's how you're letting me worship you. I almost have to make sure that I'm worshiping God in other ways, because I don't want to rely on this thing that's so fun and easy for me. Does that make sense? Like, it was actually very important to me 15 years ago. We started a human trafficking, child trafficking organization, because I wanted to, honestly, part of it was that I needed to make sure that I was giving back to God in a way that wasn't self-serving.
Oh,
because music in a lot of ways is self-serving, So it's a challenging question to answer, because it'd be very easy to just say, I do it because I love God and I want to worship him. But there's a part of that I have to battle with, how much I just love doing music,
That's fair.
But he's given me he's given us this great gift that we get to do that. Amen. And that he accepts that as our worship. And so for me, it's making sure that I'm challenging myself to sacrifice and worship in ways that aren't just fun for me, And what makes me want to do that is exactly what I was talking about, is the amount that I owe God for what he has given me and has continued to give me, and not just one time, but multiple times in my life, and what I now know as promises for what he's going to give me. And that's a big motivating factor too, is the promise that, I don't know how old you are, but I don't know how long I have left on earth. 5, 10, 20, 50, how many, 15 years, I don't know. Whatever it is, I know I've got more in store for me, and God still has plans for me, both, he's got trials for me that I'm going to go through, and he's got great blessing. And that makes me want to get up and go do it. I want to be a part of that.
That's good.
God's going to do what he wants with me, whether I ignore him or not.
Yeah.
I don't want to miss that. I want to be part of that journey, I guess.
I love it. Well, I turned 58 yesterday, so there you go.
Okay.
Yes, that's well, thanks, Tony, for joining us today, man. It's been great, as I knew it would be.
My pleasure. Anytime.
We'll be broadcasting this at some point in May. We're recording it early before I leave for this trip, because I know when I get in Africa somewhere, it may be hard to do it. So thank you for that. But it will be sometime in the month of May. Everybody will be watching it, enjoying this, and we'll get the word out about it. We'll also get the word out about your resources. So
please do. Yeah.
Everybody, thanks for joining us today. And Tony, again, man, what a blessing you've been. We appreciate you.
My pleasure.
We'll be back next week with more Live Talk. Thanks.
You're listening to Live Talk with Dwayne Moore. International conversations on worship.
Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed Tony Guerrero today on Live Talk. Thank you for joining us, and I'm back here at the airport going from country to country in Africa, and then I'll be heading to Germany doing worship leader conferences, pastor conferences, speaking in seminaries, different places, introducing some new books in different languages that we have. So a lot happening with Next Level Worship. Please pray for us during this month of May, and we'll look forward to seeing you back next week with more live talk. And if you have any questions or any way we can pray for you, go to office@nextlevelworship.com, office@nextlevelworship.com. We would love to hear from you. Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to Live Talk with Dwayne Moore. Live Talk is presented by Next Level Worship International. To learn more about our global community and find great devotionals and other resources on lifestyle worship, visit nextlevelworship.com.